really just kind of wanting to first congratulate you on Chesil Beach. It's wonderful, and in general, your whole career. You've made many of my favourite films. And first of all, kind of going off what the Bridport Festival is for, so adaptations, I was wondering, as a producer, what is it like working with other writers when you get them on quite early, if it's their work, for example with Ian McEwan, it was his original novel, and then what's it like getting writers on slightly later when you maybe already have an idea that needs developing further?
I think the most important thing when you're hiring a writer to do an adaptation is that you carefully investigate that choice and have very open conversations about the underlying work to make sure that your intentions for the adaptation are the same. Because in the process of taking something from its original form, say a novel, to screen, it will necessarily change because it's a different form of expression of the story. One is a visual medium and the other one is written medium. So it's very important to ensure that collaboration is working towards the same end. With the case of Ian, he had already written a draft of the screenplay, which was then worked on once the director Dominic Cook came on board. But I think just to try and work in the spirit of collaboration and be sympathetic and open to each other's ideas, and to be able to discuss them in an atmosphere of trust and collaboration, and always make it about the work, and only about the work.
Yeah. And kind of going off that as well, are there any particular things that draw you to stories, or the stories that you choose? What is it you look for in them? What makes them attractive for you to make?
It's a question that I ask myself often, because it is a very common question that is put to me of what is it that attracts you, or how do you know? And I'm never able to come up with an answer that goes much beyond I just have a visceral response to something. And I think I respond to something very much on an emotional level. And as I look back at my work, I can see that there really is something that bonds them together. I mean, typically they have been female-led narratives, female-centric stories, and I think it's no surprise that those are the stories that particularly interest me. And when I first started working, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a conscious and spoken effort to tell stories that I felt weren't told or weren't commonly represented, but clearly it was inside me of thinking, hang on, these are the stories I want to tell because there aren't enough of them out there. So I think, I have never been very good at, I haven't really made any bar maybe one at romantic comedies, or they do tend to be dramas and to have some depth to them, and provocative in some way and challenging in some way. Yeah.
I like thinking about your work, that definitely comes across, and I really empathise with the fact that you're not necessarily setting out to necessarily break boundaries or something, but it's something that instinctively you do. And I think all of us as storytellers, we do that, because if we respond emotionally to something, sometimes those are emotions that people don't like to talk about so much.
Yeah.
And if you want to communicate that, sometimes people haven't done it before. So that's really interesting. And in terms of the way the industry is currently changing, I mean, some of us are producing students, and the way that we look at the industry is constantly changing, the way everyone has to kind of deal with it. How do you think the industry, particularly in producing, but also in just generally, how do you think it's going to continue to change and develop because of all of these new stories that are coming? And
I wish I knew. I wish I had a crystal ball. I could be ahead of it. But the changes that we've seen have just been phenomenal, and I would even say in the last year and a half. I mean, it's just changing so rapidly, and in all the ways that you can see. I mean, viewing habits have changed. There's all these different platforms. The way people consume storytelling has changed. I read a piece today by the producer of Senna and the Amy Winehouse documentary, who was saying, were we to do those documentaries now, we probably would have done them as a 6-part on Netflix, and you think, wow, you know, Amy, it wasn't that long ago that it came out, but already you're saying the format of telling that would be a different format. And we haven't seen that kind of change in the industry for many, many, many years. I mean, for me, it was really when VHS came out and people said, VHS is going to destroy cinema, people won't go anymore. And of course it did the opposite, is that cinema attendance went up and DVDs went up, and both VHS and DVD provided a sort of safety net for financiers who were investing in films, because you knew that you had the ancillaries and that you could exploit. That has all changed. And I don't know. I mean, clearly everyone's talking about television, and, you know, you can see the disputes that are happening with Cannes. You know, Cannes say no to films that are going straight onto Netflix, and now Netflix have said, okay, fine, we're not coming to Cannes, we're pulling out. And you think, well, sort of right there in that discussion rests the conversation between film, TV, how do they work together, and, you know, what is going to be the way forward. And there's so much television that's being made. Is there a saturation point that gets reached? I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there. So
that's what I find so exciting about particularly the independent film industry, which I know that your production company is a part of, is that it's, even while all that's happening, it's still developing in itself. 'Cause, like, if I think about the independent films that I grew up watching, like, the scale of them has changed dramatically just in the last few years, like, even in terms of budget or stories and all that kind of idea. But it's still remained throughout, and I think there's always a fear that cinema will die out, and particularly, and it always goes to independent cinema first because it hasn't got that backing, but actually it always seems to come out stronger because it's the one that stays true to emotions more in that kind of way.
Well, I mean, if you look at the Oscars this year, if you think or the films, say choose 3 films: Get Out, The Quiet Ones, and Lady Bird. They're all films that were made by first-time feature film directors. I mean, Greta Gerwig had co-directed Frances Ha, but I think that in itself is quite interesting because people are saying they're director-led, and, you know, distributors are director-led, financiers director-led, and you say, well, here's an example of 3 films that 2 of them which were really present at the Oscars, and one of them just released recently last weekend, which was a huge hit. But yeah, all first timers. So
is that is like the kind of genuinity in a person something you look for when you're with directors and writers, or just anyone in the crew really? Is that with directors, I mean, as producers we only really get involved in the heads of department and the key cast and the sort of key hires, but absolutely when you're hiring a director, you're looking for someone who really has a voice, has something to say, and understands what they are trying to say with the material that they have. That's absolutely crucial. Someone has to have a vision for the project, or you're on a road to nowhere. That's everything that I have.
Great.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.